Welcome. This is Centraeon's podcast where we dive into the deep secrets and mysteries of the solar universe for residential. I'm your host, David West, Chief Strategy Officer for Centraeon, and I've got with me today our chairman of the company, Centraeon, Mr. Jay Coster. Jay, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks for having me, David.
Absolutely. We're going to dive deep into some of the details and the very what can be oftentimes scary and difficult to understand about the solar space. And so I think as we go through this series, our goal is to educate you, empower you as the homeowner so that you can make informed decisions and take power back into your own hands. Jay, you've been working at length on a white paper, very detailed, very deep. Let's just dive right into it. You've titled this white paper, Solar, A New Dawn. Tell me about it.
As we were looking for areas of challenge as we started Centraeon, things that we could go attack to help the homeowner, to help the consumer, electricity is obviously one of those areas where costs have been rising dramatically over the last couple of years. It's certainly not the only one. Interest rates have gone up, mortgage rates have gone up, costs for food, costs for virtually everything have gone up. But electricity was one area where, in looking at the rising costs of electricity coupled with the solar industry, we looked at an area where we thought there was opportunity to help drive value for the consumer. We also are looking for areas that had challenges to them. And so in finding an area where we could potentially create positive impact for the consumer, in finding an area that had challenges, within the industry that needed to be overcome, that gave us our topic. Hence Solar, A New Dawn, and that's really what we focused on in the white paper. Why the white paper? Why a really detailed analysis of the math in the industry, elements of where the industry is? We're big believers in getting very crisp thoughts on paper and then executing from there. When you see particularly relatively new industries like solar, at least new at scale, you end up with a lot of confusion in the marketplace. You end up with a lack of comprehension, and you end up with a lot of different storylines out there. And so our view was get as much of it down on paper as we can. This, call it, is a first installment, so first 15 pages. But we'll continue to dive into new topics, every week, every month, to help continue to inform the consumer around their opportunity related to electricity and solar.
Excellent. And I know you, and like anything, when you set out to do it, you have your North Star. You have that point that is your anchor, and for you, that was the homeowner. You started with that perspective in mind.
Yeah, the homeowner, the consumer, people that are trying to live the American dream.
Yeah.
As difficult as that, looks like it's becoming for people to live, really helping people, drive at a better experience in homeownership, certainly lowering costs, positively impacting, their overall cost structure as a consumer. Those are critical. And it's really why, we've launched with a purpose behind Centraeon of putting heart back in the home. We need to bring joy. We need to bring a better experience. We need home to be what it should always be, a place of comfort, place of joy, not a place of, overwhelming burden, overwhelming expense.
Love it. So you mentioned industry challenges earlier. Solar has, let's just say, a fair amount of bad press. How do you, you got to acknowledge that bad press. It's real. But then how do you solve that? How do you overcome that in Centraeon?
So I think there are really two areas of bad press, and I think they're related to the same thing, so I'll talk through both. The first is really, if you look back at 2023, I think there were over 100 solar bankruptcies.
Wow.
So the industry itself has very significant business challenges. A lot of reasons why: the overall economic environment. Some people have talked about legislative changes that have changed things like energy buyback rates. But a host of reasons why the industry has seen a dramatic pullback and significant bankruptcy activity in the overall space. And even for those that didn't go bankrupt, for those that were public, massive sell downs in the equity markets related to those companies. So bad press on that side. Probably the biggest area of bad press. I think it's hard to open a newspaper, certainly hard to look online, hard to look at a Fox news feed, hard to look at a CNN news feed, anybody's news feed, and within the course of a day not see at least an article about an 86-year-old homeowner feeling like they were defrauded or taken advantage of related to solar. And they're prevalent. You can see them everywhere consistently. And so you look at that combination of the industry's really struggling and there's a lot of bad press. To us historically, where there's smoke, there's fire. So that says there are underlying challenges. What do we think we can do differently when you have those types of challenges? There are fundamentals out of whack in an industry. And that's our belief, that the fundamentals around solar have been out of whack. The math has been very confusing to consumers. Consumers don't know what they're buying often, not because they're not smart, not because they're not trying to understand, but honestly because the industry has done a poor job at trying to articulate the real benefit to the homeowner and trying to get their decision, their mathematical answer down to a data point, not 3, 5, 10, 15, which make it very hard for people to make decisions.
Right. So even though there is smoke, there could be fire, there could be industry challenges, at this point, should solar matter? Is it a viable solution today?
To answer that question, which I'll start with, absolutely, and I'll say solar must matter.
Must matter.
And I think the key reason why is after decades of relatively flat energy demand growth in the United States, we've seen an explosion of energy demand over the last couple of years. Artificial intelligence is talked about as being a heavy consumer of energy. Crypto mining, big consumer of energy. The push towards electric vehicles, major consumer of energy. Renewed push to accelerating domestic manufacturing, reshoring or growth, major consumer of electricity. We continue to have a shift in population where we have people moving around the country, which means we need to build new homes, we need to build other new facilities in parts of the country. All of that consumes electricity. So very significant growth in energy consumption over the last few years. It's why you've seen relatively significant price increases over that same time frame for the consumer and businesses as a whole. But at the same time, our ability to satisfy that demand is increasingly challenged. And that's because the political environment, political fighting, political infighting, the permitting, the approval, even for solar or renewable projects, it's certainly painful for non-renewable projects, but it's, in some cases as painful for renewable projects. So getting supply to the market is really challenging. It's a very long process. I'd say in most cases you measure that approval process in years, certainly not, weeks, days, or months. So real challenges in getting the Americans the energy they need, particularly at affordable rates. So why does solar matter? There was a recent forecast done, I think it was the end of last year, that talked about up to 45% of our energy demand could be satisfied by solar on small rooftops, so roofs under 5,000 square feet. Most of that is single-family residential homes, some smaller commercial enterprise in there. So the benefits of that small-scale rooftop solar is the permitting and approval process is days, weeks, at most a month or two, but it's not years like you have for the larger utility scale. And the other benefit is it's right there where you need it. So I don't need to transport that energy anywhere. I don't need to distribute that energy anywhere. If I need it to run my washing machine, I need it to run, other things in my house, I'm creating it on my roof. And so avoiding the expense and the infrastructure investment needed in distribution and transmission is another major benefit of rooftop solar. So we think with the continued growth and demand, you have to put solar on the rooftop. You have to put energy supply where people are using it, and solar on the roof is the best way to achieve that.
You mentioned a couple of terms in there that could be new: distribution, transmission. Is that all that funky stuff on my electric bill that I don't know what it is. Is that what that is?
It's part. I mean, nothing's ever that clear on most bills,
Yeah.
particularly an electricity or an energy bill. But that's really, it's all the lines that are needed to get it from where it's made, where it's generated, to where you use it. And that's everything from the wires running from the pole in your backyard to a station relatively nearby, and then the long transmission lines that are needed to run all the way to the very significant utility scale energy projects that exist out there. And that's one of the challenges with supply, is that is major investment. It's major investment.
Infrastructure dollars.
Crosses people's backyards, crosses their parks, crosses their communities. So you can imagine the, energy, for lack of a better word, that exists in, people deciding whether they want those lines running through their streets, running across their parks, running through those backyards. So getting that distribution and transmission is politically hard, and it's a big infrastructure expense. So if I can produce it on my roof, all the better.
Excellent. So I eliminate that line loss and all the power loss that happens, and I've just taken power and put it back in my own hands.
Correct.
No, that's fantastic. So summing it up, yeah, absolutely solar, and it's an immediate solution. So with that in mind, we talked about bad press and just some of the where there's smoke, there's fire. Are you telling me that there's a solution that's actually easy to understand with a little bit of time diving deep into it?
I think there are. I think we have some very good ideas. I think there are a number of solutions. I think it's all going to start with getting to much clearer transparency and simpler metrics for the consumer. And I think most importantly, an education for the consumer or potential consumer, so they really understand the industry, they really understand what they're buying, and they understand its potential economic benefit. I think the second side of that is, if we can be clearer, if we can articulate the industry challenges better, I think we're better positioned to attract new, different, better partners into the industry, whether that's lenders, suppliers. It's a whole ecosystem of people that really need to come together to drive strong economic value for the consumer. And our hope is, by being transparent, by articulating some of the challenges and problems, we start to draw together that partner ecosystem that allows us to help be part of the solution.
Excellent. So clearly identified, the demand for power is only going to continue to rise. What we've seen historically for a number of years, and most recently especially, an increase in the price of that power. So it puts a burden on us as homeowners to identify solutions that are immediate and available. Let's do this next. Let's dive deep into the details, because at the end of the day, we got to understand the math behind this. Every homeowner may not understand what's in that bill, but they understand the check that they write to pay for that bill every month. All right, Jay, for those of the population that are math avoidants, a little bit afraid of the math, sometimes they get sweaty palms, real nervous, it's essential to understanding solar and how it affects the homeowner, right? So let's dive into some of the details and the key metrics, key numbers that affect the math for solar.
So I think the most important thing to start with is, how do we get to one metric? Right? When you're trying to make a decision, you're often trying to not look at 10 different numbers, 10 different metrics to help you get to the right decision. So we've always bought electricity on a cost per kilowatt hour basis. As long as I can remember having an electricity bill, it said something like cost per kilowatt hour. And so our goal in trying to get at the math discussion around solar, trying to articulate the potential benefits of solar, certainly its cost benefit compared to electricity coming off the grid. The metric we're going to try to drive to in our discussions is the cost per kilowatt hour. We know people sell solar. Hey, your electric bill last month was $292. Look, with this new program, you're going to have a loan payment of $250, so you're going to save money. Theoretically, that's a way to sell it. You can show that there's some potential for savings, but when you don't boil it down to cost per kilowatt hour, you're not putting the consumer in a place where they can effectively judge, hey, should I buy electricity from the electric company, or should I put solar panels on my roof, and is that a better decision? So that's going to be our focus as we go through the math discussion. Now you get a number of other topics, right, that then filter into that one metric. So the metric is a good, compilation of a number of key facts that have to go into your calculus. And, as you start to look at, all right, I need to know what my solar system is going to produce, right? So we'll call that production through our discussion. And that in and of itself can be a difficult discussion with a lot of complexity to it. The second is, in the vast majority of cases, consumers aren't paying cash for solar systems, they're financing them. And they're financing them because they look at an equivalent monthly payment, or as we're going to do is translate that monthly loan payment or power purchase agreement payment to an effective cost per kilowatt hour to give them that comparison. So loan payment and then the cost of financing that are embedded in that, those are also very important details. And then I'd say the third area is really around the tax credits, and maybe should have been the first thing I talked about. There's so much publicity around the Inflation Reduction Act, the tax credits that were provided to people, both commercial and residential, to both install solar and do a number of other, whether home improvements or facility improvements, to reduce the cost of energy, reduce carbon footprint, et cetera. But the tax credits are a really important part of the discussion, and probably even more important for the homeowner, because they come with a very tricky calculus to them. Mm-hmm. And it's where maybe some of the challenges in solar math start. It's that government is going to give you a tax credit of 30% of the cost of the solar you installed, but they're only going to give it to you after the panels are installed, after the system is operating, and when you next file your tax return. So that obviously isn't, hey, I'm signing this solar contract and I'm going to get my tax credit now, and it helps me pay for the system. So while the tax credit is great, it's a great 30% cost advantage in the overall equation. For most of the consumers that are financing, not paying cash for their system, they have to finance the whole system cost up front and then eventually use that tax credit when they get it to pay it down. And that creates challenges in the overall math around finance. And we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
And I'd say then the last important element around solar math to us is really thinking about what's the most ideal way for solar systems to be financed. Historically, they've been financed with solar loans. So a separate, largely viewed as a consumer loan, not too different from a car loan or a number of other loans that you may, take out to do a wide variety of, either home improvements or other purchases. But broadly, it's a consumer loan, generally 15, 20, 25 years in duration. That's how a lot of solar projects have been installed. As we go forward, we really believe that the best source of finance for solar, if you're not going to pay cash, is your home mortgage. Your home mortgage, it's a long-established market. People have been getting home loans for years. There are very deep markets related to home mortgages. And so if you can create a more effective way for your solar to be, call it, temporarily financed until you need to refinance your home, then rolling it ultimately into your home loan long-term, that to us is the optimal finance strategy around solar. And so everything we think about is how to take all of those data points, compress them to a single metric, which gets back to cost per kilowatt hour, but recognizing that you have a number of complicated topics that need to go into getting to that cost per kilowatt number and cost per kilowatt hour comparison.
Okay. No, so that was a lot. There's a lot right in there that distills what solar is.
You can't talk math without talking details.
You can't talk math without details.
There's no jumping a little bit of the way in. You kind of got to go all the way.
Yep, black and white. And I'm going to make an assumption, and you can speak to it. We've heard these different advertisements about solar's free. You're speaking about the tax credit that is offered by the government through the recent act, and it is an offset. And as you said, it takes
partial
offset.
I think one of the sales lines that you have heard people inappropriately use is, hey, I can give you solar for free, or the government's giving solar away for free,
right,
or they're going to give you 100% credit and you're never going to pay for electricity again. I've done a lot of research. I haven't seen free solar yet. I'm sure there's one pocket someplace where some municipality is giving something away for free, but the federal government isn't. It's a 30% tax credit. So in essence, it reduces the cost of your system by 30% when you go through the process of completing the system installation and then filing a tax return and ultimately getting that credit back.
And that does end up being real dollars. It's a true monetary value.
Absolutely.
Excellent. And that factors,
but not free.
But not free. Not free. Will the homeowner be completely detached from the grid in every solar instance, or is there a hybrid model? How does that work?
That's one of the other big fallacies of solar is the idea that if I put solar on the roof, I'm going to be 100% detached from the grid, and I'm never going to have an electricity bill again. Now, yes, there are instances you can achieve that. You can achieve it with a very significant solar installation. You can achieve that by adding batteries to your kind of system. You can achieve that by adding, other backup generation to your system. So going off grid, as they say, but that's a very small number of the overall installations that happen around the United States. The vast majority are systems that are intended to offset some of your electricity consumption, but not anywhere near all.
Right.
And in those cases, you're still going to have a connection to the grid. You're still going to get an electricity bill. You're still going to draw electricity from the grid, and you're going to push electricity back to the grid. And those are all important elements of the overall solar math equation, because you have to understand that notwithstanding what your solar payments might be, you're still going to have payments on your power bill as you use that power from the grid, and in some cases, hopefully get an offset as you send power back to the grid.
So when you said send power back to the grid, the production of my mini power generator that I put on my roof, I can send that back to the grid and be paid for it?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. You probably have to say in many cases or most cases, a lot of that is controlled by local utility companies, local laws and regulations, or state laws and regulations. And so it depends dramatically. But in many places around the country, if you generate excess power with a lot of limitations, a lot of caveats, and a lot of different contract language, you can send power back to the grid and get paid for it. Which is another one of the advantages of these distributed energy systems, is as the grid needs electricity for a wide variety of uses, as we talked about earlier, these mini generators on rooftops can help contribute back to that broader energy need.
So the homeowner, we really are at a micro level addressing our needs, our immediate needs, but then helping solve a macro issue of the increased demand for power.
Absolutely. And then ultimately it all boils down to math, because
Right.
you don't want to push power back just to be good. You need it to fit into an overall economic equation. Mm-hmm. And if you're paying to generate it, you need to make sure you're getting appropriate reward for it. And if you're not going to get reward by selling it back, then you need to make sure you size your system accurately so you don't build too big and have too much excess or wasted power.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So I know we mentioned the 15-page white paper, very detailed, breaking it down. You addressed a lot of the 30,000-foot view. You break it down to the granular level for the purpose of homeowners understanding the whole facet of what they're doing. While we encourage everybody to read that, let's take a few minutes and let's boil it down to maybe another 3 or 4 very key metrics that you feel are crucial for the homeowner to understand.
So I think we would highly encourage any homeowner that's looking at solar, whether you're looking at it with us or other people, to really grind at, don't make decisions until you have to, but really grind at, a few key variables. Mm-hmm. Make your solar salesperson or the solar company you talk to, make them translate all-in costs down to a cost per kilowatt hour. Okay. Make them do that work so that you can then compare it to what you're paying from your electric company, right? That's number one. Number two, I would ask, what is the tax credit amount based upon the system cost that they're showing? So you know exactly what that tax credit amount is, what it's calculated from, and ask the really important question, who gets it? Okay. Because not in every case does the homeowner get it. And that's not always a bad thing. It could be economically advantageous, as we think it can be in some cases for us to actually take it as the solar company, as the installer versus the homeowner taking it because it's more efficient. But I would always ask, what is the tax credit amount and who is getting it?
Okay.
The third I would always ask is, what is my financing rate? And so if I'm taking out a loan to put these solar panels on my roof, what is the interest rate that's part of that? But an important related question is, what is the dealer fee? And the dealer fee is an added incentive that the source of financing adds in it for their economic remuneration. So typically reflected as a percentage of overall system cost that impacts the total amount that is financed. And that routinely is a number that is 10 to 40% in the United States market right now. So I would absolutely ask, what is the dealer fee on top of what is the interest rate? So I think if you can boil down as the homeowner, what's the effective cost per kilowatt hour? What's the interest rate? What is the dealer fee? What is the tax credit amount and who gets it? You start to force a discussion about details that will equip you maybe with the roadmap of some of our math from the white paper to help make sure you make the right decision around solar.
So that, to me, that speaks of that individual, call it a sales rep or representative that's speaking to the homeowner, for them to be able to break down a before and after of their price per kilowatt. That right there is an apples to apples comparison that's probably left out in most occasions, I would think.
Yeah, I think that's why people have used, hey, what was your electric bill last month, or what has your average been over the last 6 months or 12 months? They've used that average aggregate bill amount as a metric or a bogey, in part because it's hard to do the math to get all the way down to a cost per kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
It's hard if a salesman is there in 5 minutes trying to get somebody to really aggressively sign up for solar. It takes discussion, it takes a thought process, it takes all the right facts to do it. But the homeowner should be informed. This is a, 20, 30, 40, even more $1,000 decision for the homeowner.
Right.
Get the facts, make a smart decision, and we think those are some of the key facts you should look at. I don't know that historically it's been the intention of the industry or salespeople to mislead. I just think there have been so many moving variables, and we talked about those dealer fees on the cost of financing.
Right.
They move around daily sometimes, right? So it's really hard to know. And panels, specifications for panels change weekly or monthly. So how much my system will produce is not always that easy to calculate if I'm not looking at the exact details. So I think given so many moving pieces in a relatively young industry, it's defaulted to maybe the simplest metric it could, which was compare it to your electricity bill cost.
Right.
But in reality, not anchoring to the right metric is probably why the industry has ended up where it is now. And we think anchoring to the right metric and getting the right facts is part of how you create the right path forward.
Right. Solid ground, right? It allows the customer to stay on solid ground. And I know we'll be moving into more detail about Centraeon, who we are, why we are.
And I think it's not only is the customer on solid ground, but I think it puts the industry on solid ground. It puts the salesperson on solid ground. It puts us and our brethren out there in the solar industry on solid ground, because we're talking facts, we're talking clear facts, and consumers are getting consistent, clear facts from different participants in the industry. That's what's needed for this industry to mature. Go way back to our start. If rooftop solar can be 45% of the power production in the United States of America, it needs simplicity, it needs clarity, it needs transparency, because that takes a vast ecosystem of people coming together, and they need to anchor around simplicity, clarity, and transparency.
Yeah. No, it seems like there's a lot of gray that ill-informed or ill-intentioned, players in the space could hide behind. By bringing that clarity, everybody's looking at the same thing. Very easy decision to make, whether it's yes, no, or not now. at least they have the answers.
Absolutely. And that's why we thought 15 pages,
Yeah.
was needed and
Right.
wanted to go through and do that detail. And for us too, it was just a good excuse to try to anchor back to where the industry is today,
Right.
but also to start to call out some of the things that we think can create extraordinary benefit for consumers going forward.
Right. So one of the things you mentioned that they should know is what is the dealer fee? Can you speak just a little bit to why is the dealer fee, and is there a better way?
I think why is there a dealer fee in some cases goes back to what, I guess start with the infancy of the industry.
Okay. Fair.
Right? When you have industries that aren't that mature, and while solar as a concept and even from an installation perspective has been around for decades, the scaling of it over the last few years has been quite dramatic. So I think it's fair to stay still in its relative infancy. And when you have industries that are at that point, the finance models are also in infancy. The players are in infancy.
Right.
The players that finance solar aren't necessarily the household names that finance the mortgages on your house. Those people typically don't play in very early stage industries for the very reasons we're discussing, right? There's been a lack of clarity, lack of transparency, lack of simple metrics, right? So I think that lack of maturity in this industry is one of the key reasons. With that lack of maturity comes, the requirements of yield by investors. They're taking risk, right? This is unproven. We don't have 30 years of solar history from 400 million consumers in the American market, right? And so lenders are taking risks. They want to be paid for it. The dealer fee is part of how they're paid for it.
Right.
And because they're taking risk, part of the reason they look for the dealer fee up front is it gives them a very significant return very early.
Right.
And they're not waiting, 3, 5, 10, or 20 years to get paid, back some of that investment and paid a return on that investment.
Right.
Are there better ways? Absolutely. And as you go through the white paper, you'll start to understand this relationship between the tax credit not happening till later, and I have a dealer fee, which means I'm paying a dealer fee on the tax credit amount that I'm financing up front, which means then if I turn around and I want to roll this overall balance into my home loan 5 years from now, I have this heavily inflated balance of this solar loan, which was, think of it as layer built upon layer built upon layer.
Right.
So there is an easier way, and that's to start to take away some of those layers. And how do you reduce that amount of financing needed so that when it's refinanced at a later point in time, that's done at levels that are much more easily absorbed in a mortgage payment and in a mortgage loan. So, you'll see a lot of that detail, and it's a very important part of the discussion. And we do think as we push this program, we've already started to see people in the industry start to drop those dealer fees. And as we get to, better metrics and we get to simpler products, we get to lower loan amounts overall, we think you're going to continue to see a greater prevalence of, lenders at lower rates and lower fees.
So then is it your belief that the industry as a whole is ready to move out of the infancy stage into a more adolescent, established stage?
It's why we've labeled our white paper a new dawn. We do think the pains and struggles over the last 12, 18, 24 months maybe in the industry, there's a lot of conversation about people recognizing change is needed. There's also a lot of conversation about people recognizing solar's needed. As we talked earlier, solar matters and the reasons why. And so I think, that change never happens immediately, but I think there are a lot of people around the industry and consumers as a whole that recognize it can be a valuable product if consumed and bought the right way. And I think you see that change starting to come, and I think that pace of change is going to accelerate over the next year.
Right. Well, I've had the chance of reading the white paper, so it could be a little bit of, call it cheating or whatever, but I know you believe that time is now for a group of people, teams, whatever, collaborators to step up and have that change, take the lead in that change becoming effective. And so we're going to talk more about that, dive deeper into Centraeon, the vision behind Centraeon, and the mission, most importantly, of what is getting ready to happen there. So Jay, we talked pretty good length and some detail about the solar industry as a whole. Then we dove deep into the math so that we can understand some of the key metrics and factors of how this all works. Let's now shift gears and dive directly into what we at Centraeon are doing differently.
So I'll anchor back to three key things that talked about previously: simplicity, clarity, and transparency. And, you'll continue to hear those as our big themes as we grow our business and push our message out across the country and eventually around the world. So what we are going to do differently is in addition to our ongoing solar sales activity, we're going to launch a direct-to-consumer solar sales product. And that direct-to-consumer product is meant to dramatically reduce cost for the consumer in a limited set of circumstances where we can get it pretty cookie cutter. But how do we get a product that's very easily and simply delivered? We're going to do that in the form of a power purchase agreement, which is where we own the equipment and the homeowner pays us for the electricity. We're doing that so that the consumer can avoid having to go through their own tax filing process related to it. And it honestly just makes it easier. If we install it, we own it, we take that tax credit, they never have to think about solar as it relates to their taxes. And, in doing that, enabled in driving at scale and in other efficiencies related to that kind of cookie cutter program, we can get our cost down to a level that can create a very effective cost per kilowatt hour savings for consumers. Even at, some of the, high finance rates that exist in today's industry, with our direct to consumer program that will launch first in the Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston areas, just given the scale of those markets and their geographic proximity to where we are. We'll launch in those markets. We've got a defined set of criteria for the types of homes, the type of energy usage, and other things that are critical to defining that. But even at, some of the relatively high dealer fee and finance rate scenarios out there, we can deliver energy at costs that look like 11 and 12 cents per kilowatt hour compared to the 16, 17, maybe even 20 that some consumers in the state of Texas are paying. And hopefully, as we then grow and expand that product around the country, those obviously are price points that, people in markets that are paying mid-20s or higher on a cost per kilowatt hour basis will definitely love to see come into their neighborhood. So in offering a very simple product, it's cookie cutter, it's very easy to understand. Our metric is cost per kilowatt hour. The intention is that is financed, ultimately rolled into the consumer's mortgage when they refinance it. So by us taking the tax credits rather than the consumer having to take those, we can dramatically lower our cost, which lowers the financed amount, which lowers the overall dealer fee, which lowers the overall payment, which then when you roll that into your mortgage, it's a much smaller amount. And you'll see those details in the white paper, smaller by dramatic levels. And we think the clarity and simplicity, the cost of the product, being reflected in a much lower financed amount, that's going to appeal to new and different lenders that are going to, maybe have 10% dealer fees, not 35. The lenders that may have 0% dealer fees. And so with today's finance rates, we can deliver in the 11 to 12 cents per kilowatt hour basis. If I can get a no dealer fee loan at today's classic mortgage rates, we can deliver power under this program in the 9 to 10 cent per kilowatt hour range. So very, very attractive compared to what people are paying mid to upper teens today.
Right.
Our goal is not to get you off the grid. Our goal is not to satisfy all of your electricity demand. Our goal is to give you a fair amount of cheap electricity that averages down your overall cost of energy in your home.
So you touched on two key things. One, the layers that you mentioned before that are all going in and they affect that overall cost of the system. You're eliminating those layers, you're compressing those layers. I'm going to assume that by default, that infancy stage that you mentioned about the industry, if they're bringing in more traditional lenders, it will then mature the industry as a whole.
Absolutely. And I think whenever you start to get to, younger industries, younger structures, younger supply chain models, they always have many more players than the mature models do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so a key part of the maturation needs to be reducing the number of parties in any given transaction, or reducing the parties that are taking a significant economic role, in order to get to greater efficiency for the consumer at the end of the day. And, go back, if putting heart in the home is our, purpose, really getting at simple clarity, transparency, lowest absolute cost of power for the consumer that we can drive. And these price points aren't our ultimate goals. Our goal is to chase it down.
Mm-hmm.
And we've set a moonshot program. You'll see it in some of our advertising. We call it Moonshot 6 cents, right? Not 6 cents, but 6 cents.
Yeah.
The cost of power in 1980 was 6 cents per kilowatt hour. And by moving a few variables, by lowering our cost by 15%, getting greater efficiency in panels, getting better finance rates, we directionally think in the next year to 18 months, we could get to 6.9 cents per kilowatt hour. So we can start getting in that neighborhood in a relatively short span of time. And our goal is just to keep accelerating that journey to lower and lower cost. It'll drive scale in the industry that helps drive our cost down. It's going to drive tremendous benefit for the consumer at the end of the day.
So that's quite a bit right there. You call it and label it the moonshot. Talk about a moonshot. I mean, that sounds huge undertaking.
We've talked about the industry needing change,
Right.
The industry probably being ready for change.
Right.
And if you're going to drive change, you need goals, right? When Kennedy said, let's go to the moon this decade, he didn't say, let's maybe wander around in space, for the next 50 years and see what we can do.
Right.
He said, we're going to the moon in this decade. So, we've said we believe the industry can get to 6 cent cost of rooftop solar for homeowners. Let's go attack it and let's get it there. And I think the industry can do it. Yes, we're going to have negative pressures attacking that. Inflation might continue to impact our cost of construction. Panel costs might go up with certain tariff, efforts and other things around the country. Other cost inputs may go up. Unfortunately, maybe rates continue to hold or go up. But we think as you just create added maturity, you're going to continue to see a decline in our overall cost of installation. And you're going to see a maturation in the finance markets that are going to continue to make it a more efficient tool for financing energy production on your home.
Right. And so all of those we mentioned earlier about fuzzy math or the gray areas, you want them crystal clear.
Crystal clear.
Excellent.
Oh, was that Jack Nicholson?
Yeah. Yeah. Are we clear?
Crystal clear.
Absolutely. So you've got an initial rollout coming. Tell us what you're planning and where you're going to go from there.
So our initial rollout for this direct-to-consumer program is really focused on doing, 500 installations in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and 500 in Houston. Over the next coming months. We're launching that now via social media, via the web, via other advertising. The goal is to really secure that traffic directly through that digital effort, and then have our professionals reach out and connect with those consumers. The effort is really going to be a structured reservation program so that we can drive at cost efficiency in how we execute. If we can do 10 installations in 3 days in a given part of North Texas, we can be a lot more efficient than if we do 2 in this part of Dallas and 3 in this part of Fort Worth and 4 in this part of Southern Dallas. And so as we take reservations for homes that qualify, go through that process with sizing those systems for the consumer, then we can begin to create a very organized and thoughtful schedule that allows us to execute with efficiency. Our rollout is targeted to help us learn while giving the consumers great value. For those that go at it now, they're going to get those 11 to 12 cent cost per kilowatt hour programs, which quite honestly, I think beat most solar opportunities they could look at today. In most cases, should be well better than what they're paying for in their current electricity bill. But it allows us to learn so that we can continue to drive that cost down. Ultimately, if I can do 10 houses in a row, we can just start attacking that moonshot over time. And that's where we want this to build as we look to scale it across the state and ultimately scale it across the country.
So when you're talking about, you mentioned direct to consumer, you're wanting to get, by bringing the heart back into the home, in as close, personable, and trusted as possible with that homeowner.
We have to. They have to trust the brand. They have to trust the product that we're delivering. That's why simplicity, clarity, transparency are so critical.
Right.
Those to me are how you create that trust at the end of the day.
Right.
You're not trying to confuse somebody with, 48 pages of contracts that, they're probably never going to read and have a whole bunch of numbers and details they probably should. So we need to really focus on how we simplify the execution for the consumer, simplify the number of touches, simplify the product that we're putting on the roof.
Right. And so in staying with that vein in mind, what other challenges do you see, whether it's homeowner mindsets or industry challenges? What other big obstacles do you feel are kind of on your radar that you're going after as well?
I think while we push this effort, while we push the broader growth of Centraeon, as he talked about, just staying within the solar universe, we talk about the opportunity for solar to be a very significant part of energy production in the United States of America. And I think that can be a very good thing, but it can only be a good thing if ultimately we can manufacture a lot of the equipment we need to do this solar in the United States of America. Having solar, which yes, the sun shines in the U.S., shines everywhere around the world. But if we're buying our equipment from everywhere, then it's not really an independent energy product.
Okay.
Right. So that's a massive effort because right now, and I don't know the percentages offhand, but it's probably fair to say well over 80% of either materials or raw materials come from someplace else in the world than the United States. And while, we're never going to get that to be 100%, we need to focus on creating as much of that supply chain domestically as we can if this is going to be a critical part of our energy production base. So that energy independence and American manufacturing, I think, are really critical. It's why as part of our initial rollout, we're committing to, at our cost, doing at least 10% of those installations with mostly American-made product.
Okay.
So that we can just start to create those relationships with suppliers, understand the cost differences between those products and those that are widely available from other global sources. And then as we look to scale and drive efficiency, hopefully that can continue to grow as that manufacturing market matures in the United States. So I think that's an absolutely kind of critical external factor that needs to be driven both by the industry and government. You have, the finance markets need to mature related to solar, and hopefully the finance markets need to get better for mortgages. But as these markets mature and as people understand, the good part is some of the big, mortgage, overall mortgage programs, you think about Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, they all have sustainable or green finance programs that they've created or are creating or are expanding or are better defining. And so the baseline for having better products out there to ultimately refinance or finance solar is there. Now you need to get the place we talked about earlier where there's better clarity around costs. There's a, much different cost level you're baking into the mortgage versus what some of these traditional solar finance loans look like. So it's a more reasonable add to your mortgage, not a tenth of your mortgage, but a third of your mortgage.
Right.
That starts to make it easier. So we need that maturity and maturation in the finance markets which I think, again, simplicity, clarity, transparency can help bring. But also as the industry scales, that attracts players of greater scale. So I think those markets will come to us.
Right.
I think there's, another big area just around, we've talked a lot about production and generation and putting solar on the roof. We need to do a lot more work around reduction.
Okay.
And, one of the things that we currently, provide at Centraeon is insulation services, at least in the state of Texas, as we've gotten started. And we need to do a better job at marrying solar with other things that potentially reduce your demand for energy.
Okay.
And make your home more efficient, and to do it in a way that's economically advantageous for the homeowner. So that, we need to really get on a reduction effort. Maybe we need a moonshot for that as well, but we'll stick with one moonshot for now.
One at a time, right? One
at a time. And, I think probably the final area that we need to drive towards is just, equipment is going to continue to mature. These designers, manufacturers, innovators of equipment, whether that's solar panels, inverters, batteries, they continue to get better and better and better every day, of every month of every year. And, so we need to see those innovations continue so we can continue to get more production out of the same footprint or for lower cost. But I think, along with that is we need to do a better job at designing roofs that optimize solar. We need to build houses a little bit differently so that they can accommodate solar more efficiently than a run-of-the-mill house does today. Mm-hmm. And I think if we start looking at a number of those factors, we can see a path to achieving our moonshot, but we can also see a path to solar being that 45% and truly being an independent source of energy for the United States.
Are you looking at new homes as well?
We definitely are. We think the program that we talked about for our direct-to-consumer is actually an ideal builder product. Builders haven't done a lot of solar, and a lot of that has to do with the tax credit equation. Mm-hmm. Builders don't own those homes long enough to take advantage of the tax credit. The homeowners don't own them when the solar is put on, if it's put on during construction. So the homeowner can't take advantage of that tax credit. Doing those in the form of the power purchase agreement structure that is the basis for our direct-to-consumer product solves that tax issue for home builders and that consumer, and also gets a more efficient financeable amount to include in that initial mortgage loan for that new home. So our early conversations with builders is that's a very attractive, exciting product for them. And I think that could be a great avenue to just getting better take-up in new homes. Much easier to put solar on a home as it's being built than after it's been built.
So a new home owner could move in and it's already there, all ready to go. That's fantastic. So by having a comprehensive view, which clearly you do, looking at it from the finance game, which is the biggest driver, the materials, the cost, all of these different things and factors, that moonshot doesn't seem too unrealistic over time.
It doesn't at all. I probably have greater comfort that, we can achieve that 6 cents than maybe Kennedy did when they were really going to the moon. But it's a big goal. It's a big moonshot, achievable. A lot needs to happen. And I think most importantly, need leadership in the industry to drive to it. And most important thing about leadership is having a vision and having a goal.
Right.
And I think that's why we're trying to push this approach now.
Right. So in looking at that, leadership in the industry, Centraeon is answering that call. You specifically are making it a mission to not only answer that call, but collaborate when possible and not go it alone, that it needs to be an industry-wide movement. Tell us about that vision.
So we've talked all about solar at this point. When we talk about Centraeon, our vision for the enterprise, for the organization, solar is one aspect, but it's multifaceted. Really, our view is, and goes back to that purpose, putting heart back in the home. What we've talked about related to solar and, the challenges and how it's bought, how it's consumed, how it's priced, how it's financed. Pick it, whether it's, roofs, windows, doors, just the electricity you buy from the grid, whether it's the devices you put in the home, how you finance your home, how you sell your home. there's inefficiency and cost and excess cost everywhere in that overall chain. Mm-hmm. And the American consumer is under extraordinary pressure.
Right.
You know, too many today, for my comfort, say the American dream is either fading or gone. And a big part of that, the home, has been a big part of that American dream for decades, if not centuries. And finding a way to make that a more economically enjoyable experience for people,
right,
is a real passion of ours. And so our focus is on how do we bring new and different ideas, business models, to really attack every major area of spend related to the home, starting with electricity, starting with solar. We'll get to others, but you'll see a very similar approach and path, very methodical, break down segments of industries, break down the supply chains, break down the value chains, figure out how to reconstruct them in ways that are very valuable for the homeowner at the end of the day. That will be our passion. That will be our focus, is the consumer, the homeowner. I've been in business for 30 plus years. I've been mostly in B2B organizations, limited experience in consumer organizations. This is a passion. Really creating value for consumers is, it's an uphill fight against inflation and a lot of other pressures out there today. You need energy, you need support, you need scale to help go fight those fights. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're building Centraeon.
Yeah. How many years have you personally researched, studied everything related to power as it relates to commercial buildings, home? This is not just something.
Oh no, we've invested in some things over years that were new and emerging technologies related to power or energy conservation, or HVAC. In the commercial real estate business, I've been around these decisions and discussions for decades, and have really been passionate about trying to figure out an opportunity in the consumer space for a number of years now. And we ultimately decided go create our own vision, create our own purpose, and go create the outcomes for the consumer.
And so to sum it up, that vision and that passion is embodied in Centraeon. I got to ask you, what does Centraeon stand for? What does it mean?
So what does it mean? I guess I'll start with Centraeon. Just think about that pronunciation. Really means, if you take kind of the Greek makeup of the word, it's center of your life, timeless center of your life. And that's the way we intend to use it. And so for us, Centraeon is really reflecting our home as a timeless center of our life. How do we make that a positive, enjoyable experience for people? But in some ways, you can look at it more broadly as well. I mean, the home is the center of the consumer's life, but the consumer is the center of our way of life. Right. And so timeless center of our lives is not only the home for the consumer, but it's all consumers for our way of life.
Excellent. Very well said. Any other closing thoughts?
No.
Well, there you have it. Thank you for joining us on Centraeon Podcast, where our passion, our commitment is putting the heart back into the home.